new football coach has a room that all the football players have to sit
In front of the class.
That's a good thing. It's a good thing.
Oh, okay, wonderful.
1,000 years ago.
back when we
1,000 years ago.
back when we built that.
When this was taken.
Yeah, this used to be the nuclear academy.
Okay. Okay.
And the old nuclear reactor
Yeah.
used to be in that biz lab. And so while I was the director, we actually reversed out licensing extension.
Okay.
And then we decommissioned it and we built a new one.
Okay.
Designing a reactor in those days was interesting because you didn't know what to, just like today, you don't know what your future is going to be.
Yeah. Exactly. Yeah.
So we decided not to do a hot system. Okay. Do you want to make a few announcements first?
Yeah.
Yeah. I'll get out of your way. I just want to open a bottle of water up here real quick.
And you can do it whichever you want. You can use any amount of time to make your comments or interact as you
I want to make sure. Do you think I'll get many questions on this? Because I think I can probably go through the slides in 25 minutes.
Yeah,
Yeah. Okay. Perfect. Yeah. Okay. Okay. Very good. Thanks, Brian. So we had this. I had the waste issues with all my backup slides, all right?
Yeah.
Oh, okay. I didn't.
Good afternoon. Let's get started. Our speaker next week will be David Spence. He's a professor in the Macomb School of Business here. He'll talk to us about the evolving regulation and legal issues in shale gas production nationally in the U.S. here. And he'll talk about the tensions between federal regulation and state-level regulation. To introduce our honorable speaker today, I would like to invite Professor Dale Klein, who is on our faculty here. He's a professor in mechanical engineering in the nuclear program, but he himself was the chairman of the NRC before, and many of you might remember he has actually spoken at the symposium. He holds many hats, does so many things. We are really honored to have him on our faculty, and he's also the Associate Vice Chancellor for research for the entire UT system. Dale?
Thanks. Thank you very much. I told the Honorable Bill Ostendorff that he had a warm-up act in this very same room this morning. Secretary of Energy Ernie Moniz was here, and so it's not often that you have the Secretary of Energy to kind of warm up the crowd for you, so that's good planning. Well, it's my pleasure to introduce the Honorable Bill Ostendorff. If you look at Bill's career, it's almost like he had planned to become a commissioner of the NRC with his background. He started out, went to the Naval Academy, served in the nuclear Navy for a number of years. He drove those funny little things that go under the water, called attack submarines, and was a commander of an attack submarine. He retired as a captain. For those of you that count numbers, it's called an 06, so that's the level for which he retired. After that, he went to work for the House Armed Services Committee, where I first started working with him when I was at the Pentagon for a few years. After that, he went to NNSA as the principal deputy director. That's the National Nuclear Security Administration. That particular agency is responsible for making and designing devices that release a large amount of energy in a short period of time, compared to nuclear reactors that do it a little bit more gradually. He then went to work for the National Academy of Sciences, and then had his arm twisted to become a candidate. He's in his second term as a commissioner for the U.S. Nuclear Regulatory Commission. And probably the most important thing that he's done, he has a degree from the University of Texas at Austin. Thanks a lot.
Thanks, Dale. Sure appreciate it. Dale, thank you very much. I consider Dale a great friend and mentor, and first met him back in 2004-2005 time period when he was a leader down at the Pentagon, and was fortunate to see him be a man of action and principle, and saw that continue as his chairmanship of the NRC, and to this day I'm very grateful for this relationship. It's great to be here. I graduated from law school here in 1984. Today was the first time I've been back here since I graduated, so it's been 30 years. When I was here, Dean Keaton Avenue or Parkway, I had Dean Keaton for products liability at law school in 1983. That was called East 26th Street. Across from Towns Hall, the law school, there used to be a thing called Bevo's. Anybody know what Bevo's is? They used to be one of the bookstores here. There was a competitor, actually a much more productive, successful competitor than the co-op at the time. So Bevo's is gone. My daughter was 2 years old when I moved here, and I had her, went to Bevo's and got her a UT Longhorn orange T-shirt to wear, the size for 2-year-olds. She still has that. She's expecting her first child here this spring, so that'll be interesting to see how that fits on her. But it's a pleasure to be here. I really appreciate the invitation. Varun, thank you for coordinating this. I spent the afternoon out at the Pickle Center looking at the research test reactor and hearing from some grad students with Sheldon, Varun, and Mike Whaley. And I'm very impressed with the University of Texas. I'm proud to be an alumni of this organization. And I think on the reactor side, mechanical engineering, physics, all the technical disciplines, that there's a great deal of terrific work being conducted here in Austin. What I'm going to do today is go through and kind of give a high-level issue on the U.S. nuclear program. I'm going to watch the clock. I'm going to ask Amy Cubbage. Amy is my reactor assistant. Raise your hand here, Amy. She helped this presentation. She's on my staff. I'll ask Amy to let me know after about 25 minutes have passed. So I do want to provide time for some exchange and questions that you'd like to address. So these are kind of things we plan to talk about at a very high level, and we'll move through these fairly quickly. I think it's important to start out and talk about what is our mission. I'm a regulator of nuclear safety. That's what my job is. And I operated nuclear propulsion plants on 6 submarines I served on, 1 ballistic missile, 5 attack submarines. I was a Rickover guy in the Navy. Spent 16 years on sea duty, so I spent a lot of time operating reactor plants underwater. So I have some appreciation of what it takes to be safe. Our mission at the NRC is to ensure public health and safety. And we do a lot of things. Obviously, we regulate nuclear safety at reactor plants. What you may not know is that we also regulate the safety of facilities that produce uranium fuel and facilities that administer, let's say, medical isotopes. If you have thyroid cancer and you take an iodine-131 dose to drink it for cancer treatment, we regulate that material. If you have prostate cancer, we get involved in some of the medical isotopes used for prostate cancer treatment. So we have pretty broad-ranging responsibilities. Our agency is about 3,800 some odd people, primarily in Rockville, Maryland. We also have offices in different regions around the country, in Philadelphia, Atlanta, Chicago, and up in Dallas. We were at the Dallas office just yesterday. It was called Region 4, that regulates all the western half of the United States. And yesterday afternoon we also went to the Comanche Peak Nuclear Power Plant in Glen Rose, Texas. We have a commission structure. So there's 5 commissioners. Our chairman is Allison McFarland. A few years ago, you've seen Dr. Klein's picture over here. Served as chairman from 2006 to 2009. So we are a 5-person decision body that gets involved in 3 primary issues. We decide policy matters. We decide adjudicatory matters, somewhat like a court, appellate court system. And we also make decisions on whether or not to require new rules for the regulation of nuclear activities in the United States. We have staggered 5-year terms. The party in the White House has 3 representatives. There's 3 Democrats, 2 Republicans on the commission. Let's talk about our U.S. nuclear program. And I'm going to open with this slide that shows that nuclear power contributes about 18 to 19% of the electricity generation in the United States today. That number had been somewhat steady, and I'll talk more about more recent events, going down a little bit over the next year or two. I know that this group gets involved in a lot of energy policy issues and looks at coal, gas, wind, solar, hydro, new technologies, energy storage kind of topics. So we'll talk more about some policy aspects of the role of nuclear on later slides. Today we have 100 operating reactors in the United States. If I were speaking to you a year ago, that number would have been 104. So 4 nuclear power plants in 2013 announced they'd be shutting down. And I'll talk a bit more about that. But we still have 100, more than any other country in the world. Let me talk very briefly about the plants that have shut down, because I think a lot of how many people here are in engineering programs? Okay, keep your hands up. How many people in science programs? Okay, y'all lower your hands. How many people here are in neither science nor engineering? Okay, about 2/3, 1/3. That's a good mix. So what I want to show you here is 2 plants that, this is kind of for civil engineers, material science demonstration purposes, 2 plants or sites that have announced shutdowns over in the year 2013. The one on the left-hand slide is the Crystal River site on the Gulf Coast of Florida, north of Tampa. And about 4 years ago, this shows the containment building, concrete, very thick structure, getting ready to cut a hole in the structure for maintenance replacement purposes, for replacing equipment. The site had to detension these cables that run around the circumference of this concrete structure. And in the detensioning process, there was delamination of the concrete structure. Read that as cracks in the concrete. So this yellow hourglass, you may be able to see that a little bit, basically outlines the part of the structure that had cracks or delamination. And the utility at that time, Progress Energy, since bought out by Duke Energy, in looking at the future repair, and this is heavily involved with concrete specialists, rebar, civil engineering experts, did a calculation that they could not determine specifically what it would take to fix this. The price range for repair was $1.5 to $3.5 billion, big number. And they made the decision from a business standpoint to shut that plant down permanently. In California, on the right-hand side, is a San Onofre generating plant that had an experience that had not been witnessed before in the United States. This is January of 2012, just 2 years ago, when steam generators that had been replaced in the previous 2 years, replacements by Mitsubishi in Japan, the steam generators experienced a tube leak that was manifested by tube-to-tube wear, where the tubes were impacting each other due to a phenomenon called fluid elastic instability. Fluid mechanics experts may have some exposure to that discipline. But basically, these generators were in place for less than 2 years, had tube leaks, indeterminate path forward as far as what it would take to fix these. There were problems we as a regulator found with the computer modeling of this design. Basically, the design in these particular generators increased the number of tubes, changed the steam quality factor, steam dryness, and the modeling did not accurately simulate the conditions experienced. Plants are shut down. That's the San Onofre site. 2 other locations I'll mention, and this is all getting into the economic side now. This is not a technical issue I'm going to get into. This is economics and market conditions in the United States, primarily associated with shale natural gas. Kewaunee is a plant in the state of Wisconsin on the shores of Lake Michigan, operated by Dominion Resources. A single unit site, 556 megawatts. And because you had one unit at that site, and because of the timing of the market contract renewal for Dominion to sell power, this is in an unregulated market. We call it a merchant market. These power contracts expired the end of 2013. And Dominion, when it compared the cost of continuing to operate this facility with the natural gas competitors for electricity generating facilities, is determined to not be economical. What's interesting, and Amy and I were at Kewanee back in September, if you go down Lake Michigan, and Chicago's down that way, you head down 8 miles along the shoreline here, you go to the Point Beach site, where there are 2 reactors being operated by a different utility with a different contract structure. And the Point Beach site had very favorable contracts in place out to 2031, 2032, making a lot of money. So the timing of the Kewanee piece did not work in utilities' favor and made the decision it was not economical to continue to operate it. But this plant was being operated safely. The utility had invested several $100 million the last 5 years in upgrades to that facility. Mount Yankee on the right-hand side, somewhat similar structure, 1 unit, 600 megawatts. Because of the market structure in New England, and we'll talk more about the market in a few minutes, this plant, again a merchant plant, not a regulated facility, was not able to economically be in the black. And so the owners of this plant, Entergy, that operates a lot of nuclear plants and other plants around the United States, made the economic decision to shut that plant down, and it will be shut down at the end of 2014. Now, you may say, gosh, Ostendorff's up here and he has a very doom and gloom story. That's not necessarily the case, but it's just the reality of the economy here. So I'm going to go on now. Those are plants shutting down. I'm going to talk now about plants being built in the United States. But before I do that, I think it's important to understand this slide. And I'll comment that as a commissioner of the NRC who watches the industry fairly closely and has a safety regulatory responsibility, these plants that have shut down are not doing so because of concerns on the safety of nuclear power operation. They're not doing so, quite frankly, for any other reason than economics. This cost piece is huge. And I'll compare, just for a moment, many of you are aware of this, that in the market today, we have some tax incentives that from a policy standpoint have been favoring wind and solar facilities. Your production tax credits for wind facilities in particular, they give a very significant economic advantage to wind. We don't have any carbon tax policy to incentivize carbon-free electricity generation in this country. You know, it's been talked about for many years. Some of you here are familiar with the Kyoto Treaty. Years ago, there's been discussions about should the United States join that. Today, the decision has not been made. But the absence of a carbon tax or absence of carbon emission policies have not incentivized nuclear the way many thought it would 5 or 10 years ago. Another piece is the reality that a natural gas facility and the price of shale natural gas has gone down radically over the last 6 or 7 years. In 2006, shale gas in this country cost about $10 to $12 a million BTU. Earlier this month, or end of last month, it was about $4.30 a million BTU. So it's about 35 to 40% what it was just 7 years ago. Is that shale gas price factor due to increased reserves found via fracking techniques, hydrofracturing, you're familiar with that, I'm sure, have created a lot of reserves for this country. So currently, the cost of shale gas makes it a difficult decision for somebody to build new nuclear, unless you're in a regulated state where all your costs of construction will be recovered by the Public Service Utility Commissions, requiring ratepayers to pay those costs of capital investments. So let's go on here. We do have new construction licenses. We're looking at the NRC. When I got the NRC in April 2010, there were 26 licenses being considered by our new reactor staff. Amy Coverage is part of that staff before she came to my office. That number has now gone from 26 to 14. So we are still looking at new reactor license applications at the NRC, but not as many as there were a few years ago. So where are they most likely to be built, the new reactors? Quite frankly, in states where you can recover the capital cost of construction. So where do we see that? Let's look at a couple of other examples. This is a picture of the Vogtle site. This is about 30 miles south of Augusta, Georgia. And the NRC approved the construction license to build 2 Westinghouse AP1000, 1,000 megawatts electric at this site. This is a picture taken December 2013. The construction is well underway. It's perhaps around 50% complete, maybe a little bit more. A couple thousand workers on site down there. This particular design has significant safety enhancements compared to existing reactors. The phrase that is used is passive systems. I think most of you are aware of some of the issues. How many people are familiar with the Fukushima event? Yeah, okay. So I won't go into the details there, but basically the lack of electricity, and the lack of electricity to power circulating water pumps to provide core removal cooling to remove decay heat result in core meltdown. In contrast to that design of Fukushima, the AP1000 has significant passive features. So think big tanks with tremendous quantities of water that do not require any electricity. The motive force is gravity. When the reactor system is depressurized, gravity flow will allow the injection of water for decay heat removal. That's a key difference in the AP1000 design and some of our existing designs. So you don't have to have electricity for 72 hours. So this is a very significant safety enhancement, and as a commissioner I voted to approve this design for the AP1000 back in December of 2011 and voted to approve the Vogtle license in March of 2012. In like fashion to Vogtle, we have being built in South Carolina at the Summer site. This is just north of Columbia, 2 AP1000 reactors. And so we expect these units to come online in the time period 2017 to 2019. Construction's underway, Westinghouse designed. Chicago Bridge and Iron is the construction contractor, working with the Southern Company for Vogtle, the South Carolina Electric and Gas for the Summer site. I know Dale Klein's been down there a number of times. I've been down there a number of times looking at the construction. And this is the first new design being built in the United States in decades. And I think that's a good news story. Those are the 4 new design plants being built. There's a 5th plant being built, and that's in the Tennessee Valley Authority operating area in eastern Tennessee. It was called the Watts Bar 2 site. Watts Bar construction started decades ago. That construction stopped in the early 1980s. In 2008, TVA decided to resume construction. That's happening as we speak. I was on site there just 3 weeks ago. Very active site, Watts Bar. There's a sister unit that was built, Westinghouse design, back in the late 1970s, early 1980s. It's finished in the 1990s. And so that is the 5th unit. It should come online 2015, 2016. So while I've mentioned 4 sites shutting down in the United States, here are 5 units that are being built. It should come into operation. I'll tell you that many utilities in the United States are watching these construction projects now in order to inform their future decision making on building nuclear at some point in the future. Let's shift over to a different topic. Let's talk small modular reactors. How many people have heard about SMRs? Okay. So SMRs have been a fairly hot topic in recent years. The Department of Energy has made 2 awards for SMR licensing development. The first of these is for Babcock & Wilcox M-Power, integral pressurized water reactor. So you have, on this side, the reactor vessel, pressurizer, and reactor coolant pumps all in one integrated unit. That's a pretty radical shift from prior designs. We're at the Comanche Peak plant just yesterday afternoon. 4-loop Westinghouse designed, but you have reactor coolant pumps that are standalone, separate from the reactor vessel, separate from the pressurizer, separate from the steam generators. This is all in one. I had a chance to visit the facility of M-Power down in Lynchburg, Virginia. They have a very robust engineering test group, about 25 to 30 people full-time. They're doing thermal hydraulic modeling, and actually with a 60-foot tall test loop, doing the heat transfer modeling for what this reactor unit would be if it were built. We expect to receive a license application from B&W for this at the NRC in the next year. The plan is for the Department of Energy, their license financial support is to develop a project that will be built with TVA at the Clinch River site in Tennessee. And the tentative plans are for TVA to build 4 of this design at Clinch River, and hopefully that construction would start sometime in the next few years. There is a second group that has received funding. I don't have a picture of it. It's called NuScale. NuScale is run out of Corvallis, Oregon, consortium with Oregon State University and Fluor. And it has a similar design, but some different aspects. They received funding just back in the late fall of 2013 from the Department of Energy. Let's look at a different arena, international. And what's interesting is, and I would say this at a fairly high level, even though there was a significant accident at Fukushima, the international nuclear community believes that most of those lessons have been learned. Amy from my staff was on the Fukushima task force for the NRC, one of 6 people to write the report that was developed and delivered to the commission where I served back in July of 2011. We think we know the major lessons learned. And countries are continuing with nuclear power development plans because they believe that nuclear power can be operated safely. We can take aboard the lessons learned from Fukushima and make corrections. Most countries are doing that. What's interesting is look at a lot of countries where, quite frankly, let's take Korea. Korea does not have indigenous fossil energy sources. Very little coal, almost no gas, no oil. So Korea has been importing a lot of their fossil energy. They have a number of nuclear power plants they've already built. They'll continue to build more. China. How many people here have been to China? Fair number. So you walk in Beijing. What happens to your eyes? Okay? Air pollution is a big issue there. And to their government's great credit, they've taken some very significant actions. As the Chinese middle class has developed over the last 20 to 30 years, electricity demand has skyrocketed. And that's good news for standard of living for the Chinese population. But air pollution has been a problem. A lot of reliance upon coal for electricity generation, and they're trying to take some aggressive steps to get rid of their coal reliance. So China has 29 plants under construction right now. I've had a chance to go to one of their sites. They're building at Sanmen, an AP1000 Westinghouse design. And I'll tell you, China's being very aggressive here, moving out. If you go to their website, China would tell you that they plan to build 150 reactors by 2030. Now, whether that happens or not, I'm not going to comment on it, but that's what their Chinese corporation website says for the future plans for nuclear. Another good news story, I was talking to a couple of faculty members here earlier today, is that the United States NRC and the U.S. nuclear industry has very close relationships with our Chinese counterparts. So from the regulatory standpoint, the construction standpoint, and the utility standpoint, there's a lot of exchanges between the Chinese experience for their construction and what we're doing here in the United States and vice versa. It's a very positive exchange. This is the policy piece. About 2 weeks ago, I was asked to go to the National Academies of Science and give a presentation to a committee that's looking at the future of clean energy in the United States. I was asked to provide the commissioner's perspectives on what is the role of nuclear in the future clean energy in the U.S. And so this is kind of the slide that I used for talking points. And I'll highlight a couple of these here. I'll tell you that my personal opinion is there are no technology issues to speak of when it comes to whether or not nuclear can or cannot be operated safely. We know it can be operated safely. It's being operated safely in the United States right now. What we do have, however, are different policy matters that affect the economics, the market conditions for nuclear. I've already mentioned carbon emissions. This country has not yet adopted a policy for carbon emissions. Whether it will or will not is dependent upon some commentators, a matter of politics, not science. I would tell you that if this country decides to go forward and take aggressive steps to limit carbon emissions, then I believe personally that nuclear is an essential component of that strategy. I was in Germany a couple months ago to give a speech. Germany, right after Fukushima, 1 week after, based on Green Party politics, made a decision to phase out nuclear by 2022. In early 2011, Germany had 17 operating nuclear power plants. 8 of those have been shut down. 9 remaining plants will be shut down over the next 8 years. When I visited this power plant outside of Munich, the ISAR plant, was discussing with their CEO Germany's economic situation as far as electricity, and German consumer prices for electricity have increased 30 to 35% over the last 2 years. Germany had made headway and it had reduced through nuclear and wind and solar their carbon footprint by 330 million metric tons a year. Since the decision to shut down these 9 plants, they've lost all that headway. And they're burning dirty coal, buying gas from Russia, and buying nuclear-generated electricity from France and the Czech Republic. And I just bring that up because for those that may be involved in some kind of a policy analysis, I think Germany is one of those case studies you want to keep your eyes on to see what happens going forward. 24/7 baseload generation capacity. Does everybody know that? Who knows what that means? Most people? Okay. So the capacity, 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, to ensure when you go turn your light switch on or plug in your laptop, there's some juice there on the other end. This country does not currently place an economic value on baseload generation capacity. And so what's happening in many markets, and I was talking to the CEO of Luminant yesterday about this, who operates the Comanche Peak plant, and I've talked to a number of executives with Entergy, Exelon, PSE&G, and Southern about this. Right now, it's very difficult for a utility to make a decision to go build new baseload generation capacity. Partly because of the preference given to wind and solar and the fact that as wind energy comes on the grid, people are required to take that in the grid and to reduce their other baseload generation capacity. So I offer that the second bullet as a dynamic and is played out with the polar. Anybody here from New Jersey? Anybody from Jersey? Okay, I had some people in from New Jersey a couple weeks ago in my office. January 6th, it was really cold in the Northeast. It was the polar vortex. And I had the president of PSE&G that operates the Salem Hope Creek nuclear plants come to my office and was telling me about what happened January 6th, 7th, and 8th in New Jersey. So you had this precipitous temperature drop. As the temperature went down, people here take fluid mechanics, compressibility of gas. It's harder to move gas to the pipelines. You also have the circumstance that in New Jersey, residential gas customers have preference over electricity generating plants that use gas for gas-fired electricity generation. So the electricity supplies that rely upon gas, we're not getting gas. And the coal-fired plants that require some natural gas to fire them up, we're also not getting gas. So the spot price of electricity went from about $50 a megawatt hour in New Jersey to $1,800 a megawatt hour overnight. I was told, and you're closer to this than I am, that because of that cold snap, the electricity spot price in Texas went to the cap of $5,000 a megawatt hour. So I bring that up from an economic standpoint, that the base load generation capacity is a significant issue, and executives are telling me that it is a major deterrent to building new base load generation in the United States of any fashion. I've already talked about the market economic factors. I've already talked about production tax credit, especially how it's favoring wind through 2016 at least. Whether or not it will be renewed is a separate question. I would tell you, put aside being an NRC commissioner, just as a taxpayer, I'm a big believer in diversity of energy supply. I think we need all of the above. Then the last policy issue is high-level waste. And I've got 5 or 6 backup slides that I could show. I don't plan to right now. We'll see how Q&A goes. That talks about the high-level waste solution. I think we need to resolve our high-level waste geologic repository issues. I've spent a lot of time as a commissioner on Yucca Mountain issues. I've taken a number of votes in that area. I would tell you that my personal views are that the high-level waste storage issue is not a question of safety or environmental stewardship. It's a political decision. That by itself is about a 30 to 45-minute discussion, which I will not go into for the sake of time. So I think what I'm going to do right now is I'm going to stop right here and see what questions you may have on any topic. I'm glad to take them. And I'll ask you to please identify yourself and then ask the question. Thank you.
Vivek here will pass the mic around, and while he's grabbing the mic, I'll make an announcement. This event is also co-sponsored by the Texas Journal of Oil and Gas Energy Law. Can you folks just raise your hands, please? Thank you so much for joining us. And this is an effort where we are partnering with different student groups on campus to increase participation here. Thank you again. Questions?
While waiting on that, I'll tell you one of the most interesting courses I took at law school was with Professor Ernie Smith in oil and gas law back in the fall of 1983. I spoke to him today when I was down at law school.
With regards to the waste solution, do you see the U.S. policy on reprocessing changing anytime in the near future?
Okay. Well, right now, if one looks at the official guidance on reprocessing, there is no prohibition, legal prohibition of reprocessing. President Carter in the 1970s signed an executive order to stop any reprocessing. This is the Clinch River facility back in the 70s. President Reagan changed that. Even though it is allowed by executive order, there's not been any commercial project or government project to move forward with reprocessing. There's nothing that prohibits it. When I talk to the industry about this, whether or not they're going to pursue reprocessing, the response I get is, at this point in time, it's not viewed as being economically appropriate to move forward. Purely economics. I visited reprocessing facilities in France, United Kingdom. There's facilities in those 2 countries that reprocess spent fuel for about 12 countries. So it's actively going on in Europe. But there's not been any significant move afoot in the United States because of economics. The price of uranium, basically. Good question.
Hello, Olivier Beaufils. I come from France, so I worked in the French nuclear industry. Have a question on SMRs and the fact that one of the main drivers of cost escalation over the last decades have been regulatory decisions and improvement in safety. And so I'm wondering about the economics of the SMR and whether if the NRC keeps the same sort of standards of safety standards and requirements for SMRs without the economies of scale, how are those reactors going to be economic?
Great. Thank you for the question. This is a frequently asked question. I would say we've not yet received a license application from any applicant for an SMR. We expect the B&W to come in the next year. I would not envision us changing or lowering certainly any of our safety standards. I think the safety standards we have in place, the risk metrics for safety will continue to be applied towards SMRs. There are three primary areas where the license application for an SMR might look at a different aspect. One is the emergency planning zone. The source term, the core size for an SMR will be less than our existing reactors, so there will be some calculations on the emergency planning zone. Two, security. The security staffing requirements, which were raised by the NRC appropriately post 9/11. Most of the SMR designs are evaluating a potential underground construction site. Will the underground construction site and presence change our security requirements? That's a possibility. We've not made any determination on that. We will not until we receive a license application. The third one is control room staffing. If you have an aggregate of 4 different reactors on one SMR site, which is the proposal at Clinch River, will we change our control room staffing requirements? That's something we're still looking at. Again, it'll depend upon the license application. So there are some things that may be different. It's too early to tell how they'll play out.
Hi. Hi, my name is Christian. So there's been news about like a more streamlined process to be able to get like standard nuclear models to be able to get through the approval process quicker.
Yes.
I'm wondering if you could comment on that
Sure.
and what it'll take for that to be successful.
Great question. Historically, the NRC had, I'm going to use an act, it's called a Part 50 process. In the 60s and 70s and 80s, you applied for a construction permit, and then after construction was done, you applied for a subsequent but separate operating license permit. So it was a bifurcated process. NRC changed that to a new Part 52 process, which combines the construction permit and the operating license into one licensing activity. And when I talked about the Vogel and Summer sites, those AP1000 licenses were all under one, was called COL, the Part 52 process. An applicant can come in still and request a construction permit and then an operating license permit under our Part 50. That's allowed. But this new process is underway here with Vogel and Summer. Those licenses were the Part 52, the new one. And I would expect that new designs as they come in are likely to use the Part 52 process. However, we've heard on the SMR, for instance, the B&W might consider the Part 50 process. I think it's too early to tell what the future will hold. We think it's a good thing to have one integrated license review process as a step for the future.
Hi, my name is Matt Weldon, and I wanted to go back to the Kewaunee closing.
Sure.
Because I didn't quite understand the economic force that was driving that plant closure, given that it was fully capitalized, presumably it only has operation and maintenance costs.
Yep.
The timing's very bad in terms of a
Yep.
low price, but it's presumably that plant would represent the lowest operating cost as a fully capitalized plant that you could offer in the competitive market.
Well, the facts were that when...
I guess what I'm asking is what the source of new debt or anything.
Yeah, no, it's not a new debt issue. It's really an operating and maintenance cost. When you looked at how much it takes to operate that plant, and most plants have a cost structure, I'm going to say around $30 to $35 a megawatt hour to produce electricity. Now, that's just a rough ballpark. Point Beach, the other plant just a few miles away, was able to sell their power at about $45 a megawatt hour. So they're in the black. But those are based on power purchase agreements executed years ago by the Point Beach group. When Kewanee Dominion, the parent company, was trying to look at new contracts for selling the power from Kewanee, they were going to be in the red. For the power purchase agreements they were able to execute, given the low cost of coal and gas-fired electricity in that part of the country. So it's not a capitalization piece. It's just based on the pure continuing to operate this plant with your staff. How much does it cost to generate a megawatt hour, and how much could you get for that? And that was a negative proposition based on the market price they could get because of the low cost of gas in the Wisconsin area.
It was also production tax credits and subsidies for wind.
Yeah, good point. Thanks, Dale. Pure economics. You're right. The plant was already built. It's paid for. It's hard to envision that. I was surprised.
Yeah, thank you again. Appreciate it. Enjoyed our conversation earlier. Is there any kind of bogey as far as what you'd see as far as a carbon price or a natural gas price that might change the economics and flip it to where it's now economically viable? It would be economically viable for
new nuclear. I don't know of a number. Have you heard a number, Dale?
Yeah, the number that it varies between utility executives on how conservative or how risky they are. But the former CEO of Exelon wanted $8,000 cubic feet natural gas and a $25 ton carbon tax, and he was good to go. Others will say they'll do it at different values, but that was one number.
Thank you for taking assist there.
Commissioner, I want to follow up on a previous question on the sequenced licensing versus the integrated licensing. So in the 60s and the 70s, if you could go through the logic from the Commission's perspective, what was the logic of having a construction permit and then an operation permit? And also, what may be the logic of the SMRs or BNW going through a Part 50 process and not Part 52? What really is behind, what is involved?
Okay, I'm going to use a lifeline to Amy Cubbage from my staff here. She worked in that NRO office for many years.
As far as the logic for the prior system, that's just how it started. As far as the logic for the new system under Part 52, the whole key to it is early resolution of issues so that you resolve all the safety issues before you begin construction. With the old Part 50 system, during construction, new requirements could be imposed that would require additional modifications to the facility, and there was a lot of uncertainty, and it extended construction schedules, extended costs. And so with the Part 52 process, you resolve those issues before construction. With regard to the potential for a Part 50 application from Clinch River, that finality of the Part 52 process takes away the flexibility to make changes during construction. So with a first-of-a-kind SMR, they're envisioning if they need to make some changes or adjustments after the licensing, the Part 50 process does give them that flexibility to make changes, and they would be taking a risk because they don't have that full operating license before construction. I hope that answers. Right.
When you have an expert in the office, in the audience, it's always great to have an expert provide the right answer. Thank you, Amy. I'll tell you, in 1983, when I was in law school here, I spent part of one summer working for a law firm in Richmond, Hunton & Williams, that was doing a lot of environmental and energy support, and I worked on a case involving the Shoreham nuclear power plant in Long Island, New York. And the Shoreham plant received its construction permit, built the plant. They operated only at low power for a very short period of time. And I think that example, where at that time it was $3.5 billion, $4 billion, is 1983. The experience from that was also an industry perspective on how could all this money be spent and you never be able to operate the plant. The governor of New York at the time would not let the plant operate without, well, we required basically an emergency evacuation exercise to be conducted as part of the drills. Nassau County, around the plant, and the governor were not supportive of nuclear, to not let that emergency planning exercise proceed, which is a prerequisite for an operating license. So I think that was one example from industry at the time that was involved in the Part 50 process.
Thank you for that talk. It was really quite interesting. I have a question. You noted that many of the problems that deal with like nuclear, I guess, more nuclear energy in general, is that it's mostly economic. So in that case, you noted that a lot of it could be fixed with some of these like policy solutions you talked about. I'm wondering if there's any sort of research on the other end of like the production cost of nuclear energy that can reduce, I guess, how much it costs to produce just 1 megawatt hour. Because in the end, I feel like that's what's going to change the economics so that it can compete with shale gas or other renewable energy that's subsidized by policy or whatnot.
That's a great question. I'll tell you that I don't know that there's any formal research being conducted as you think about academic research. I would tell you, though, that the construction projects in Georgia and South Carolina are being very closely watched by other companies who are thinking about nuclear to see, okay, what's the overall cost and schedule performance of those 4 reactors being built in the southeast of the United States. I think you'll see people looking at those examples to see, another few years, does that make sense for them to leverage and take advantage of those lessons learned? When you go and build a nuclear power plant, and these are the first power plants that are being built of a new design in decades, that's a pretty significant undertaking. I was telling some folks earlier today, in 1980, when I was lieutenant in the Navy, I was on my second submarine. It was one being built in Newport News Shipyard. It was a Los Angeles class attack submarine, and every week I was the representative from the ship to go meet with the shipyard, naval reactors, supervisor shipbuilding, and some other folks. And this is the 25th submarine being built. Now this is again back in 1980. The 25th submarine being built of the same design. Yet every week there's some minor changes that had to be requested and approved. So for a pretty mature program at the time, even the nuclear Navy was taking some time to get into the groove, so to speak, of learning lessons from one construction project to the next. I think the nuclear industry on the commercial side is very much in that waiting mode right now.
My name is Francois Walbrook. You said something like, in this country we don't assign economic value to baseload power. Could you elaborate what you mean by that?
So the market conditions in this country are very complicated, and I'll acknowledge the NRC does not regulate the transmission side. We regulate the nuclear power plants on the generating side. The Federal Energy Regulatory Commission, FERC, has a footprint with some regulatory controls. Different state and regional markets. Here in Texas you have ERCOT. So basically the state of Texas is isolated from the rest of the country as far as transmission. You have PJM, the market up in the New England. Well, I'd say the mid-Atlantic states. You have ISO, PJM, various market structures around the country. And in some cases, let's take Georgia. If you're the Vogtle plant, and this plant costs $7.5 billion to build, the Public Service Commission in the state of Georgia is guaranteeing that the consumers in that state will basically, through their cents per kilowatt hour, pay back to recoup the cost of building the Vogtle nuclear power plant. It's the same in the state of South Carolina. those are regulated states. Some other states are not regulated. And so you have very disparate approaches around the United States as to how electricity generation capacity is looked at and whether or not utilities can or cannot recover their cost of construction. So that's kind of the context of meaning you have some regulated, some merchant facilities that can only get their recoup whatever they're able to sell in the market. And they only get money back if they actually sell the electricity. So let's say a plant in Wisconsin, where I was talking about the Quanti plant, somebody builds a new plant in that state. It's a merchant state. If that plant is designed to generate 1,000 megawatts, but only sells 300 megawatts, it only recoups the cost of that 300 megawatts. The fact that it could produce and sell 700 megawatts more, there's no payment for that. But the market structure around the United States is very complicated because you have state, regional, and federal entities, and I don't pretend to be an expert at all, other than I know it's very complex.
I have two questions. My name is Harry Lindner. I'm in the nuclear engineering program here. Are the current plants that are being built, are the loans guaranteed by the Department of Energy? And then my second question is, for China and these new plants, do you believe that they're being built with the same regulatory rigor and observation that we have here or that's in Europe? Like, will those plants be safe? Should we expect another disaster with poor design or construction?
Okay, good questions. I would tell you that the Department of Energy announced a loan guarantee program about 6 years ago for new nuclear construction, and I believe that the Department of Energy and the Southern Company are in the final stages of getting to closure on the loan guarantee for the Vogtle plants being built in Georgia. Is that correct, Dale?
But they've been there for 8 months.
Yeah, yeah.
Close.
Yeah, yeah.
But it's getting closer.
It's getting closer, yeah. So it's taken a lot longer than anybody anticipated, but it's still working. As far as the question on China, I do not pretend to be able to have an assessment of the rigor or safety of the Chinese facilities. I know the Chinese engineering capacity and capability is very strong. I've been to, along as Dr. Klein has as well, I've been to the Sanmen site where they're building AP1000 plants in China. I can tell you that NNSA, the Chinese Nuclear Regulatory Authority in Beijing, has a very strong relationship with the United States NRC. Lots of exchanges on how to look at best practices and how to deal with specific aspects of the AP1000. I'm not going to say here that I have any concerns, but I'm not really in a position to make an assessment. A fair question, though.
Good afternoon. My name is Carlos Castañeda, Energy Policy Analyst for State Representative Lon Burnham. Commissioner, thank you very much for coming and thank you for your lecture. My question is about that last bullet point that you have up on your slide, actually. You probably heard how last week Speaker Strauss set out a list of interim charges for the legislator to consider before the next legislative session, and so that's one that our office is going to be looking at. My question is, what do you see as the timeline for the construction of a high-level radioactive waste disposal facility, considering how it took several years and really billions of dollars of preparation for the Yucca Mountain project? And even though we have a very important low-level waste disposal facility out in Andrews County, Texas, near the border with New Mexico, I'm wondering what this new facility may look like, or if it's just going to be added to what we already have out in Andrews.
If I could answer your question with a high level of confidence, I would leave here immediately and go to the nearest casino. And I've got 6 slides in backup on the high level waste issue in Yucca Mountain, which it's a very long story. I'll tell you, I had heard in the news recently about the state of Texas being interested in exploring the possibility of a repository. I've been to the waste control specialist site at Andrews. I was there about 3 years ago. This country spent about $15 billion so far on Yucca Mountain. There's a lot of politics there, which I'm not going to go into. I had voted as a commissioner in 2010 to not allow the Department of Energy to withdraw the Yucca Mountain license application from the NRC. My personal beliefs, and I voted to follow the law. The Nuclear Waste Policy Act has established Yucca Mountain as a site, and unless and until that is changed statutorily, we need to follow the law. I don't believe personally that Department of Energy or the administration has followed the law. And so I'm a proponent, if you don't like the act, change the law. Now, why did I bring that up? Because there's a Blue Ribbon Commission that reported out in January 2012, appointed by Secretary Steve Chu, the Department of Energy, to look at other options for how to move forward with the high-level waste repository in the United States. The Blue Ribbon Commission had a number of recommendations. I'll talk just about one, which was to pursue a consent-based approach to bring communities and states into more of a consent-based process for selecting a site. I think that's fine. The law could be amended to accomplish that type of objective. 4 senators, Senators Alexander, Murkowski, Wyden, and Feinstein, introduced a law before the Senate back in June of last year to move forward with this approach. It has not yet gone out of committee. It may. I don't see any political prospects for anything happening soon, certainly not in 2014 on a decision on that legislation. There's been some strong opposition in the state of Nevada to Yucca Mountain. I've heard that Texas is interested, the state of Mississippi is interested, Carlsbad area in New Mexico is interested in looking at repository possibilities. I'd say that the issue here on this bullet is capable of being solved with scientific engineering principles. It's not a technical hurdle. It's a matter of will, policy, and politics to come to some closure. I will tell you that the NRC has directed our staff, the Commission directed our staff back in November of last year, just 2 months ago, to complete the safety evaluation reports for Yucca Mountain, issue them publicly. Hopefully that will happen by January 2015. If I were in the state of Texas looking at how to move forward here, I want to understand and leverage those documents to understand what the experience was from the experiment and review in Nevada. It's a key area. I know that we need to have a solution. I think it's a sad state of affairs that we've not made more progress. I can tell you in 1983, when I was here in Austin, I went downtown on Congress Avenue and went to a hotel for a hearing with the Department of Energy on the future high-level waste repository site. This is 1983, true story. It's 31 years ago. And at that time, Deaf Smith County was a potential site. There's a salt dome in Louisiana, or a place in Kansas, one of those two, I can't remember the site. Louisiana. I grew up in Louisiana. And then Yucca Mountain was the other site. And so I remember hearing Department of Energy officials assure the audience in this hotel room in 1983 that one of these locations would be open and serving as a repository in 1998. Didn't happen. But it was not for technical reasons. So I'll stop right there. Thank you for the question. Question in the back of the room here?
We'll take this. This is the final question. We are out of time, so we'll just make it the final question.
Hi. Thank you for providing a great talk. I wanted to ask about the markets, and you mentioned the facility in Wisconsin on Lake Michigan, and how that's really a separate market from one that's 8 miles away.
Yeah.
Now, what can...
Well, it's a separate set of contracts.
Separate set of contracts.
Yeah, yeah.
So what can NRC do, or what could the FERC do to, incentivize plants to go across markets and regions, or, to be able to distribute that energy capacity, right? So that way, if there's a facility that can generate and it has excess capacity, they can sell it across the country or into different regions.
Well, first of all, let me tell you, the NRC has no jurisdiction or authority on this at all. We are strictly a safety regulator for nuclear safety. We do not do anything affecting or to control or regulate the market structure. FERC, Federal Energy Regulatory Commission, has some authority, but not unitary authority. This is the complexity of the market piece. So I would say that an example is used that Dr. Klein mentioned is if there were a dollar amount associated with the carbon tax, if that were a policy that were enacted nationally, that would be one potential step that could be taken. Another step could be the second bullet, placing some dollar value to incentivize baseload capacity, the ability to generate and provide electricity at any time. Currently, those two steps have not occurred. But it's not anything that we can do, the NRC can do. Quite frankly, FERC cannot do it without there being some broader consensus with the states and the other power markets. It's very complex. I appreciate the chance to have been with you all today. The people here in the audience, you guys are the ones that have a chance of making a difference here. And that from a policy, technical standpoint, taking steps to work towards a solution to resolve some of these issues. And I know that with the education here at UT and the collaborative relationships you have amongst each other and the different parts of the university, you'll be well equipped. Thanks for the chance to spend some time with you. Appreciate it.